And in order to do that effectively, you need to be super clear about who they are at a company level, who they are at a stakeholder level, and what's going on in their mind. What are their biggest goals? What are their biggest challenges? And how can you educate and build trust with them way, way earlier on in the journey, long before they're ready for sales contact? When early on, they just know that there's a goal they're trying to figure out, a question they're trying to get answered, a stressor that's driving them nuts, a challenge that potentially threatens their company or threatens their career, and they need to get answers to that. If you're able to show up and your sales professionals are able to look a lot more like enterprise consultants, like a big four consultant, as if they work for like PwC or Deloitte or KPMG or EY or something like that. If they can reposition themselves in that way, you are so much better off. Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And I want to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales, Marketing, and Q&A live stream, where each week I take a handful of questions diving into some of the biggest challenges facing go-to-market teams in and around the data center industry. This includes sales, marketing, customer success professionals, product professionals, channel partnerships, and executive sponsors. And it doesn't matter whether you're from a data center operator, like you're in colocation or wholesale, hyperscale, edge, or modular, or maybe you're from a technology company that sells to or partners with data centers, or a facilities company, or maybe you work in construction or real estate in and around data centers. We know that's an incredibly hot area with all the construction boom now being fueled by the growth of AI. Or maybe you're from a sales and marketing company that sells to or partners with the data center industry. But either way, if you're serious about growing your role, your team's role, your company's role and influence in and around the data center industry, you are for sure in the right place. This week, I'll be tackling a handful of top of mind issues. We'll start by looking at how to create better content for data center energy management and sustainability. Ooh, that's a really, really hot issue right now. There is literally a front page headline on the Wall Street Journal today talking about how the exact words are, there is not enough power for America's high-tech ambitions. And I would suspect that it's not just the United States that's facing these issues. Globally, we're literally going to run out of power options for the ambitions of the companies that are building out around AI and HPC powered data centers. So being able to create better content around data center energy management and sustainability, hugely important area. Then we'll shift our attention to how can data center sales managers connect with the right partners and the right customers. What's the best segmentation strategy? What's the best go-to-market strategy? How can you grow simultaneously your partnering engine and your customer growth engine? Then we'll look at how to sell financing and lending to hyperscale, enterprise, colocation, and edge data centers. After that, the third question, we'll take a quick break for a word from our sponsor. Then we'll come back and we'll start with how to overcome customers' fear of technical data center issues. Then we'll look at how to market and sell constrained data center inventory. And I would guess that that constrained data center inventory is very much the first cousin, very closely related to issues around data center energy management and sustainability. And then finally, we'll wrap up this week's data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A live stream with how to find data center clients. So without any further delay, let's dive into this week's first question. How do we create better content for data center energy management and sustainability? Well, what's super important to keep in perspective is we are now in a world where most prospects, most customers for data center energy management and sustainability related solutions really don't want to spend much time with your sales team anymore until they're at the absolute end of their research and decision-making process. 10 years ago, if I was hosting this live stream, the number that would have likely been thrown around was from CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, that's now part of Gartner. And at that time, about 56% of a typical buyer's journey was over before the sales team got to meet the prospect. It was a little more than halfway over. That number has accelerated dramatically to the point where now at least 83% of the buyer's journey, researching, comparing options, evaluating pricing, is happening before your sales team gets to meet a prospect. Wow, is that a massive challenge for so many companies in and around the data center industry that are leaning heavily on very traditional kinds of marketing and sales development activities? But it's also a really big opportunity for those folks that can get in front of that and create amazingly helpful educational content that stands in for what used to be done by a human. So when your ideal clients, when your buyer personas are learning about the topic that's most important to your business because you've decided that you and your team want to be seen as the go-to experts in your space around data center energy management and sustainability, they can't help but come across your amazingly insightful educational thought leadership content that answers the dozens or hundreds of questions that are top of mind for that particular buyer persona when they are actively looking for things related to their biggest goals and their biggest challenges around energy management and sustainability in the space. They're coming across your blogs, your social posts, they're watching your videos, they're at the risk of sounding a little meta, they're coming to your live streams, attending your webinars where you're educating and building trust at scale in a one-to-many motion. You're using those events strategically for certain kinds of buyer personas, for certain kinds of goals. So you leave an incredibly powerful impression on those buyers that naturally accelerate them through their sales process and accelerate them right to your front doorstep, virtual front doorstep, where they're now ready to have these great conversations with your sales team. And when you do that right, you put yourself in a position for creating amazingly powerful, impactful content that helps you achieve your business growth goals, that helps you get found by the right people in the right places at the right time and in the right context. So the most important thing is to recognize just how different the world is today compared to 5 or 10 years ago. And second, to figure out how your customer is going to be a legit player in the content, in the educational, in the media and events space where it comes to getting in front of your most important stakeholder, your most important buyer personas. Now, just to make sure we're on the same page, a buyer persona is a representation of one of your most kinds of clients based on educated research and some select educated speculation. This is usually how you segment up your ideal client list. So let's say, for example, you look at your customers, your clients, where you've been most successful in energy management and sustainability, and you have your handful of case studies, and you decide, okay, out of these kinds of clients we've worked with, these are the ones strategically that we want a lot more of going forward. So from there, you build out a single one-page ideal client profile that addresses demographics, business model, company size, maybe some attributes about other things that they have in their tech stack, or things they're doing with their facilities, or what have you, where you're a natural fit. So once you have the companies defined, you can build a finite list of target companies that you want to target. It could be as few as a few dozen. It could be a few thousand. For most companies, it's usually somewhere in the middle. So you have your couple hundred or maybe a couple thousand companies that you want to target. And then within those companies, who are the most kinds of important stakeholders that you want to build relationships with? The most important stakeholder, usually based on economic value to the sales process and internally championing what you're doing, is called the primary buyer persona. The second most important might be called a secondary buyer persona. And the third most important, that kind of comes along for the ride, but may not be that critical, might be a tertiary buyer persona. So once you know who these people are, then you go about researching and developing buyer persona documents that gives you the consensus on the biggest goals that each of those folks are working on, that gets them a big promotion if they get right. What are the biggest stressors and the biggest challenges they're dealing with that are driving them nuts, that are causing them to lose sleep, messing up their vacations, taking away time from loved ones, and if they screw up, could really jeopardize their career. Once you know the consensus on these, it becomes way, way easier to create impactful content that lets you get found early on in the buyer's journey, so you can competitively differentiate, so you can dramatically improve your positioning, and so you can continue growing your business in the digitally driven buyer's journey. Next question. How can data center sales managers connect with the right partners and connect with the right customers? So you're a sales manager, you're working on a sales team, maybe you're a sales director, a VP of sales, chief revenue officer, something like that. Depending on your company size, the titles may be more of a matter of semantics than that much of a practical difference, but you're working on something revenue generating in some kind of sales or sales-ish kind of capacity. And you want to know what you should be doing to connect with the right partners and connect with the right customers? Well, there's two things going on. First up, we connect with everyone differently today than we did as recently as 10 years ago. Why? Because 10 years ago, a big part of your playbook might have been cold prospecting, sales development, where you had a junior level person on your team who was making cold calls till their fingers fell off, who was banging hard against the cold email and the cold LinkedIn until there were literally smoke marks on the keyboard for them too often. So, the challenge with all of that is we now live in a digitally driven buyer's journey where most people don't want to talk with your sales team until they're very, very far along in their research and decision making process. So the nature of how we connect with everyone has to change. No one is up at 2 o'clock in the morning worried that they're not going to get enough salespeople to pay attention to them. They're just not. They're up at 2 o'clock in the morning worried about their biggest challenges, their stressors, the biggest problems that they're facing in their job. And the way we enter their world isn't the way we used to enter their world because they don't need to let us in that way anymore. The way we enter their world is by showing up with helpful educational content and insight that addresses their biggest problems, that gives them answers to some of their biggest questions, that suggests solutions to their biggest issues that they're currently grappling with. And even more importantly, because we know who they are, the buyer persona they align with, we can think like a chess match multiple steps ahead of them. So if you think about a very simple linear buyer's journey, you have awareness, you have consideration, and you have decision, 3 stages. Within those 3 stages now, most of the top industry research firms identify about 28 different touch points that happen between a complete stranger and a purchase decision. So, with companies that are doing a lot of traditional marketing and sales, they might be investing half of their budget in field and event marketing. And, unfortunately, you can have the most epic golf tournament that's ever been planned. You can have the most amazing poolside cabana party at Vegas during the conference. But unfortunately, those are just 1 or 2 touch points out of 28. So the question is, how do we get involved in the other 25 or 26 touch points that are going to help us ensure that we stay on the short list, that we stay top of mind, that we help guide all the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options, and so that we make sure that we're in the running all the way down to the finish line. If we do that super effectively, in some cases, we may actually be the entire shortlist, meaning that you've used your content, your go-to-market strategy to effectively neutralize all of the competitive options. So when we talk about connecting, what I tell a lot of the companies that I consult with is marketing needs to be prepared to go much deeper in the buyer's journey than it ever has before. Historically, in and around the data center industry, marketing would get involved heavily in awareness and a little bit of consideration. And towards getting into decision, they would lob a bunch of leads and opportunities over the wall at sales. And hopefully sales did what they needed to with getting to those opportunities fast enough, vigorously enough, with a good sales process, keeping up their part of the service level agreement. And historically, sales really and sales development didn't get involved much in content marketing. They didn't get involved much in webinars or social posts or email newsletters or digital ad strategy. But marketing needs to be prepared to take it deeper than they ever have before, and sales needs to be prepared to come in much earlier than they ever have before, so that the sales professionals are seen more as teachers, trusted advisors, professors, consultants. Your goal, the transaction-oriented salesperson of the past, is history. In order to be relevant, in order to get access to these great conversations with your future clients, your sales professionals need to be seen more like Big Four consultants. The interaction should feel more like free consulting than a sales process, a heavy qualification where they're being worked, where they're being a lead that's being worked. You need to provide value before you can ask for value in return. You're putting deposits into the relationship bank account before you dare try to ever draw on that bank account. So that's the idea on how to connect. Now, connecting with the right partners versus the right customers. This is another place where I see a lot of people in the data center industry mess this up. The reality is your partner and your customer are two different buyer personas. This is super important. Your channel partners and your customers are two different buyer personas. So each of those kinds of individuals have different goals relative to what your company would do with them and have different challenges relative to what your company would do with them. The job to be done that your company provides to a channel partner, the job to be done that your company does for a potential customer. I see so many people get off the rails with that. So what that means by definition is you need a different ideal client profile, a different set of personas for your channel partner, at the minimum one kind of buyer persona for your channel partners, and a potentially different ideal client profile, a different buyer persona, different, certainly at least a primary buyer persona for your ideal customers. And that also means you need a different go-to-market and different content strategy. And sure, there'll be overlap on some of it, but there's a very, very high likelihood that when you start having conversations and doing surveys and figure out what's top of mind and the biggest consensus around their top 5 or 10 goals or top 5 or 10 challenges, you're going to see some pretty big splits, some pretty big differences between those two categories of people. So when you try to lump them in, it doesn't work especially well. I also see a lot of naivety and arrogance in and around the data center space where people feel that they can use cold outreach entirely to address their channel partnership goals. And coming from the perspective of someone that got involved with channel partner strategy and channel partner enablement with a Dow 30 company, with a Fortune 500 company early on in my career, I can tell you that unless you have the brand halo and industry reputation of a company like Cisco or IBM or Red Hat or Microsoft, the example I'm using, you're probably going to have to work a little hard to get potential channel partners to pay attention to your company. They're not going to beat a path to your doorstep just because you say we'd like channel partners. No, there's channel marketing and then there's channel enablement. And you actually don't get to do the channel enablement of onboarding new clients and training them and giving them the skills and toolkit as if they were commission only sales members of your team or commission only solution engineers of your team. You don't get to do that until you've done all the channel marketing effectively with attracting, engaging, and educating and building trust with those potential partners. So it really is a different content strategy. It's a different go-to-market strategy. And unless you have the luxury of being a huge, huge company like a Digital Realty or an Equinix or something where you have a massive brand reputation already in the industry, you're going to tell you you're going to have to work a little harder to figure out from your channel partner's perspective why they should pay attention to you in the first place. That's completely different than coming up with an effective channel partner program that incentivizes them to stay with you after they've already onboarded. That's part of your channel enablement. But the channel marketing, this is an area where I think people are completely neglecting it. They have wildly unrealistic expectations of how quick things are going to work. And the reality is I can tell you without a doubt that a full-time sales hire, a full-time engineer is going to pay way more attention to your company than a channel partner that's juggling a dozen or a couple dozen different relationships with different kinds of companies like yours. So in terms of connecting with the right partners, in terms of connecting with the right customers, it's a different go-to-market strategy, a different content strategy, it's a different event strategy. It's even a different version of product market fit until you know exactly the right products and services, the right kinds of clients, the price points, the durations of the terms, sales cycle length, the unit economics. So the sooner you can come to terms with there's a whole new way of connecting, and the sooner you can come to terms with the fact that you really need to segment out and have two different playbooks for how you deal with channel partners compared to end customers, the better off you're going to be. Next question. How do we sell financing and lending to hyperscale, enterprise, colocation, and edge data centers? Yeah, it's interesting. They mentioned hyperscale, enterprise, colocation. They didn't mention wholesale, and they didn't mention modular. But anyway, they're doing financing and lending. Potentially, it sounds like something around debt or equity, or combination of the two, to data center operators. So the most effective way to do that is to recognize that the best sales process that you're going to need is largely one in which the most important stakeholders at these companies are going to see your company as the go-to expert in the space. So it starts with being crystal clear on your ideal client profile, who these companies are, where they're located, their size, their attributes, their business model. It sounds like you have some of that already thought out, but you certainly need to get much clearer. From there, you can build a target account list, a defined list of a couple hundred or a couple thousand companies that are, hyperscale, colo, edge, or wholesale, or something along those lines that you want to sell to. And then within each of those categories of companies, there should be a primary buyer persona. That's a kind of person, a semi-fictional representation of a kind of person that's most important to build a relationship with. There's a secondary buyer persona. That would be the second most important person that you want to build a relationship with. Off the top of the cuff here, I would guess that when it comes to financing and lending, probably the most important person you're going to eventually need to get to is the CFO. But depending on the company's size, there could be anywhere from a few people that work on the CFO's team to dozens or maybe hundreds of people that roll up to that, depending on the company's size. So how you get to that person, that's largely a function of doing really good buyer persona research, a good ideal client profile, a good account-based marketing, account-based selling, but really, really deeply understanding what that kind of person is trying to get done in their job in and around and adjacent to what you do can allow you to create very, very impactful thought leadership educational content. So you're seen as the go-to expert in this space. You should, when you figure out the persona for the CFO or the finance director or the VP of finance or whatever you're going to call it, or capital or something along those lines, you should have a consensus on the top 5 or 10 biggest goals they're trying to figure out in their job, and the top 5 or 10 biggest challenges that are stressing them out right now. And once you have that in mind, it's way, way easier to come up with a strategy to develop effective content that stands in for the conversations that you used to be able to have early on in the journey. And just like everyone else in and around the data center industry, you're going to be subject to the same kind of buyer preferences that technology and facilities and construction and real estate companies were. What are those preferences? Where the CFO and everyone in that person's organization now only wants to talk with you at the end of their research and decision-making process. So you need to figure out a way to use content and events and subject matter expertise to stand in for what used to be a human conversation. That's the most important way to be able to sell financing and lending to these kinds of companies, is you have a way to attract them. You're generating leads. You're, at the risk of sounding really meta, you're inviting them to events like this, like live streams and webinars, where you educate and build trust with scale. And that alone can do huge, huge wonders to moving things forward, with getting people to spread your content among other stakeholders on their teams and accelerate leads into sales opportunities. So that's the playbook that I would use for selling financing and lending to hyperscale, enterprise, colocation, and edge data center operators. So I think that's a really good first place to look at with the top 3 questions that we're going to look at today. We'll take a quick break from our sponsor, and we'll come back and address 3 more questions. This is Joshua Feinberg from the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales, Marketing, and Q&A livestream.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey, Joshua Feinberg here, CEO again of the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, DCSMI. We are all about elevating the role of go-to-market sales marketing professionals in and around the data center industry. And you are watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. The next question that we're going to address this week is, how do we overcome customers' fears of technical data center issues? How can we overcome customers' fears of technical data center issues? That's a great question. And it first starts with defining who our customers are and what they care about. So if we look at the kinds of customers that we've been most successful with, who like shows up in the case study interviews, who we want more of when you're developing your sales plan, your sales kickoff, where do we send our sales teams generally in the direction of? So we need clarity around who those folks are and the job to be done that our company actually accomplishes for that particular kind of customer. What do they essentially hire our company to do? And when they do that, who are they effectively firing with the alternatives that they're leaving to the curb by effectively hiring us? So once we know who these kinds of companies are, we can develop an ideal client profile, an ICP, that defines at a company level the size, the location, the business model, who's a really, really good fit. And then within there, we define the individual buyer personas that get the most initial, intended, and extended value from the data center products or services that we provide. So once we're crystal clear on the kind of company we're working with and the kind of stakeholders that we are working with, we'll have a really good idea of their most important goals that they're trying to achieve and the biggest challenges that they're frustrating with. And I would say that the challenges, the problems, the stressors are all one and the same as the issues. And this will become refined over time. So you may do initial research for interviews, but in reality, if you have any kind of network operations center not going, or help desk, or ticketing system, or bot, or all of the above, or customer success, account management kind of functions, every couple of weeks, certainly every quarter, you should be rolling up and understanding what the biggest challenges are, what the biggest issues are, so you have a pulse on what needs to be at the top of your strategy for proactively addressing. And this could be proactively addressing it from a post-purchase, post-engagement customer success and onboarding perspective. And maybe it's knowledge-based articles, maybe it's explainer videos, maybe it's some customer-only webinars, maybe it's the need for developing a professional services engagement that you provide to these customers. But they have fears, they have stressors, they have problems that they're dealing with. And in order for us to be able to proactively address those, we first need to get consensus on what those are and prioritizing around how frequently they're coming up and who are the biggest customers, and some kind of weighting system basically that helps you to figure out what you want to tackle first. So these are customers' fears on data center issues. And the best way that we can overcome them is by demonstrating to prospects and customers that we have successfully overcome them in the past. So the kind of content that you would create for a post-purchase scenario that would be delivered by your customer success team, your account management team, customer marketing, that can be repurposed into being used for potential customers, being used as part of awareness and consideration type of education and kind of events. And the first cousin with all that is to the extent that you have customers that are willing to be interviewed for case studies. Ideally, like this, on a webcam in some kind of podcast or webinar format where you can interview them and say, so before you signed on for our company, what was going on that was causing you to need to prioritize this kind of initiative? Once you had us install this, once you signed on for this, what did you notice was different and how did your company benefit? Basic case study 101. By getting to the bottom of those kinds of questions, and this is more than likely if you have a product management team, they're more than likely spending a lot of time in these kinds of conversations. When you have consensus on that and you develop these kind of content assets, these kind of events, experiences, they can be pure gold. They can be incredibly productive assets for being able to take those experiences and put them in front of similar kinds of clients who have similar kinds of fears and reservations. So when it comes to overcoming customers' fears of technical data center issues, the first thing is you need to figure out the consensus on who exactly these customers are and what their biggest fears are. And then once you have that in place, then you need to go about figuring out a way to create content with some of those customers in the form of like case studies or webinar interviews or something like that, that allows you to not only share those with existing customers to inspire them about what's possible and to help them get more value out of your products and services, but also do a prospect only version of those that allows future customers to see what it would be like to work with your company, to have you guide them on overcoming some of their biggest fears of technical data center issues. Next question: how do we market and sell constrained data center inventory? Okay, that is a fantastic question. And it's going to become a question that's going to become an even bigger issue in the coming months and in the coming years. Because as the demand for AI, artificial intelligence, GPU powered data centers continues to increase, we know a lot of legacy facilities are going to need to be decommissioned or repurposed, and a lot of new facilities are going to need to be built. We also know there's also forecasted to be a lot of grid power shortages, utility companies simply running out of power. This is where we see a lot of desire to have innovation around cooling, innovation around sustainability. This is where we see the idea of nuclear reactors potentially being used in data centers to address some of these issues. But we know that a lot of the top 5 markets in the US, for example, like New York, Virginia, Dallas, Chicago, like we know in North California, we know that that these constraints have existed for a long time. We know power is going to exacerbate them. We know lack of land, permitting, states getting nervous about greenlighting more of these projects to go forward. It's all going to result in constrained inventory. So when it comes to marketing and selling constrained inventory, what I'd encourage you to do is there's 2 parts of that. Obviously, there's a C-level financial CFO kind of conversation and a product kind of conversation, and then there's the go-to-market conversation. Like, okay, you figured out what actually is available, how we can package this and offer this, how are we going to create awareness of this, how are we going to market this, and how are we actually going to sell this. The more constrained you are, the more you can likely zero in on a very, very crisp definition of your ideal client profile and a target account list. And one of the interesting parts with the data center industry is we are so used to the dozens of conferences that we go to on a regular basis that more than likely you have been exposed to tons and tons of different ways that companies use scarcity around real estate and scarcity and urgency around approaching dates. So the reality is, when it comes to your own constraints, you may want to take a note from that playbook, put on your real estate developer hat, and recognize that you have a finite amount of constrained capacity, and there's urgency and there's deadlines that are coming up, and lean into how you're doing that. But yeah, get super tight about who your ideal client profile is, get super tight about the personas that would care most about and be most interested in consuming, signing on, and being able to lock down the constrained inventory, and then figure out how you're going to get your message in front of them. It could be a combination of LinkedIn ads. It could be some outbound. It could be some offline events. It could be a lot of virtual events like this, like live streams and webinars. But first, get your house in order with sitting down with your CFO, sitting down with your real estate, sitting down with your product folks, figure out the inventory you actually have, and then bring your go-to-market team together, your marketing, your sales folks, your CS, your onboarding folks, account management, and then figure out like who are the best potential customers for this. What's the messaging? What's the process that makes the most sense for educating and building trust with these folks, and how we're going to address this most urgently. The final question that we're going to address for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is a really basic one that we get in one way, shape, or form all the time. How do we find data center clients? How do you find, and let's qualify this a little bit, how do we find the right kinds of data center clients for your business? Because data center clients for someone else's business may not be the right ones for yours. And if we think about the data center industry as a whole, it's a pretty big ecosystem. There's a lot of segmentation, a lot of fragmentation that goes on. At a high level, I think about the data center industry as being operators and then companies that sell to and partner with operators. And within the data center operators, of course, you have the enterprise data centers, but then you also have the outsourced operators, colocation, wholesale, hyperscale, edge, and modular. And then you have all the other kinds of companies that sell to and partner with all the operators. These are technology and facilities companies, real estate and construction companies, and sales and marketing companies. And then with each of those categories, like technology companies, for example, over at DCSMI, we've actually identified 22 different kinds of technology companies that operate in and around the data center industry. There's a couple handfuls of kinds of categories of facilities related companies that operate in and around the data center industry. There's a couple of handfuls of different kinds of real estate and construction companies that operate in and around the data center industry. And the same thing for sales and marketing companies. So there's a lot of different kinds of business models and potential clients and ideal client profiles and buyer personas that we're actually dealing with. So the first thing is recognizing that your potential clients may be very different than another company's kind of potential clients. And the way we get there is we look at where you've been most successful to date. We look at who onboards the smoothest, who retains the longest, who's most receptive to your expansion marketing, cross-selling, all that other stuff. What gives you the best case studies? What gives you the best unit economics? Where's your company most happy to be working with? What gives your team the most gratification? What's strategically the most important to the future of your company? Once you have those basic questions answered and you've achieved product market fit, you know exactly who the ideal clients are, you know what products and services they purchase, what price points, what the duration is of both the agreements and the sales process. Once you have basic consensus on that, then you can work backwards and build your go-to-market playbook for finding the right kinds of data center clients. Because at that point, you'll be able to define your ideal client profile, a nice crisp one-page definition of what the company looks like, and you'll also be able to define the segmentation strategy within that ideal client profile. Who are the most important buyer personas that you need to build a relationship with? And you don't pick your favorite kids, but you do need to pick your favorite buyer personas, especially when you're resource constrained. So for sure, you'll designate a primary buyer persona, a secondary buyer persona, the second most important kind of stakeholder that you need to build a relationship with internally, and maybe even a tertiary stakeholder. Over time, you also may develop negative buyer personas. Those are people that could, on the surface, kind of sort of may seem like they're okay. But a couple of years into your business or more, you've identified that no, there's this hidden quicksand that comes along with every kind of that kind of person. So, that's another drop-down list on the form. That's another place that we do targeting, except we're doing negative targeting in that case. Like, in other words, if they pick the drop down, if they pick the choice on the drop down form that indicates that they're a certain kind of person, you're probably going to disqualify them. Along the same lines, if you're doing something like outbound using LinkedIn Sales Navigator, or using ads using something like LinkedIn Ads, the LinkedIn Campaign Management System, you can do exclusions, kind of similar to what you would have done in a traditional search engine marketing context with like negative keywords. But it's a negative buyer persona where on the surface with a broader net, it might seem okay, but better, that ends up being a very unprofitable client that you just can't help. So you need to understand your success stories. You need to understand your ideal client profile. More than likely from your ideal client profile, you can build an account-based marketing, an ABM, or an account-based selling targeting list of anywhere from a few dozen companies, maybe a few hundred or a few thousand companies that you want to target. And there's individual stakeholders that you want to build relationships with. And then when it comes to finding the right clients, recognize that they're going to research and make their purchase decisions today vastly different than how they would have done that process 5 or 10 years ago. If I was hosting this live stream 10 years ago, CEB, Corporate Executive Board at the time, found, and they did this research in coordination with Sirius and Salesforce, found that about 56% of a typical buyer's journey was over before you met a prospect. So with a sports analogy, you were a little past halftime, or like in a baseball analogy, you were probably deep into the 5th inning, maybe 6th inning before you got to meet a prospect. However, 2-3 years of everyone working from home in the early 2020s accelerated and changed everything. We're now to the point that like 83%, Gartner found that 83% of a typical buyer's journey, researching, comparing options, evaluating pricing, now happens before sales contact. 83% of the game is over before you meet them. It's crazy, right? So what do you do? How do you get involved so you're relevant and you don't sit out all but the last 17% of the game? It's a great question. And most companies that are addressing this strategically have recognized that they need to be found in the right places by the right people at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that they're seen as the go-to experts in their space. The teachers, the trusted advisors, the subject matter experts, and the thought leaders. And in order to do that effectively, you need to be super clear about who they are at a company level, who they are at a stakeholder level, and what's going on in their mind. What are their biggest goals? What are their biggest challenges? And how can you educate and build trust with them way, way earlier on in the journey, long before they're ready for sales contact, when early on they just know that there's a goal they're trying to figure out, a question they're trying to get answered, a stressor that's driving them nuts, a challenge that potentially threatens their company or threatens their career, and they need to get answers to that. If you're able to show up and your sales professionals are able to look a lot more like enterprise consultants, like a Big Four consultant, as if they work for like PwC or Deloitte or KPMG or EY or something like that. If they can reposition themselves in that way, you are so much better off. However, there's going to come a point in time in the very near future where that approach is not going to be a nice to have. It's going to be mandatory, because most of your prospects, 70, 80% of B2B decision makers now prefer to make their decisions digitally. That was research from McKinsey. So if you're relying on old-fashioned, traditional, interruption-focused sales and marketing, that stuff is really running out of steam fast. It's getting crazy expensive. It's becoming wildly ineffective. And in many cases, it's even offensive to your prospects. So the sooner you can turn the corner and recognize that your potential clients are buying very, very differently today than they did as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, you're going to be so much more effective at finding the right kinds of data center clients for your company. And that's what it's all about, is being able to connect the dots across the full go-to-market team, across marketing, sales, customer success or account management, CS or AM, product management, channel partnerships, and your executive sponsors. The right people, so you can attract the right kinds of clients in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so they see your team as the go-to experts in their space. You get out of the vendor box once and for all. You can stop competing on price. You can stop being treated like crap and actually have prospects, future clients that want to talk with you, as opposed to you having to beg and bribe for and grovel for attention. If you're still begging for attention, if you're groveling for attention, if you're having to bribe people for attention, you need to switch it up, because it's just not going to be effective anymore. They need to see you as the go-to experts in the space in order for you to find the right kinds of data center clients. So that's the final question that we have for today. I am Joshua Feinberg, CEO of DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. You have been watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream that I do each week, where I address a handful of the top of mind questions that are most important across the full go-to-market team, across the full data center ecosystem. I wish you great success in growing your data center related businesses. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, feel free to look me up and send me a connection request. And by all means, certainly follow DCSMI on LinkedIn as well. And we also have a great weekly email newsletter. If you don't currently get that, I would strongly recommend subscribing to that. And you can sign up for that by visiting our website at DCSMI.com. I wish you great success and look forward to seeing you back again next time. Take care now and stay safe.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.